Hey everybody, Dana Sparks, broker of Maximum One Greater Atlanta Realtors and director of the Real Estate Academy of America. Continuing on with the series on the changes that the Georgia Association of Realtors, or GAR, has made to the 2025 contract package. Please check out the description below. I will link all the other videos I have done in this series, as well as the school, the Real Estate Academy of America's website, because we are teaching free 3-hour CE classes on all of these changes. I'm recording today's video in December of 2024. We are teaching these classes throughout the month of December and on into January. Please check back on the calendar as we continue to add new classes all the time. So today I am going to talk about the changes that GAR has made to the Form F259, Broker Compensation Agreement Exhibit. This was a new form that came out July 1st of 2024, and quite a lot of changes on this one for 2025. And if you seen any of my videos or taken any of my classes this year, these changes will not surprise you. We completely anticipated them. So let me share my screen. Let me dive in and we will, I'll go over those changes with you. All right, so this is the 2025 version of the Buyer's Broker Compensation Agreement Exhibit. Now, just briefly, I've done the video, check out the video on the pre-showing compensation agreement, and that is GAR Form F258. That would be the form that you would use if you know the amount of compensation coming, if any, coming from the seller's side, either the seller directly or the seller's broker, to be paid to the buyer's broker. If you know that amount before you ever show a property, then you use that form. This form, and one other option I'll show you in just a few minutes, stay tuned to the end, is if you're an agent, you are working with a buyer, and the buyer wants to see a house. You are going in there blind with respect to any compensation coming to the buyer's broker from the seller side. So you may in your communication with the listing agent, you may know that there is compensation coming from the seller side, or you may not know, and you just don't know how much. Nevertheless, you're a buyer's agent. In my example, you are working with a buyer, you go show a house, buyer wants to write an offer. Buyer wants to ask the seller to offset their financial obligation to their own broker, i.e. you, by asking the seller to compensate the broker. So one of the ways you can do that is using this form, the Buyer's Broker Compensation Agreement Exhibit. What got changed in 2025 from this brand new form that was just introduced to us July 1st of 2024 is the name, as well as this paragraph down here. So let me briefly show you what it looked like in July. So just a few short months ago, it was called Broker Compensation Agreement, and it had paragraphs where it was amount of compensation to the buyer's broker, who was being, how much and who was paying it, and compensation to the seller's broker. The problem is, this is an exhibit. So it is going to be initiated by a buyer in their initial offer to the seller. Well, a buyer and a buyer's agent has no clue how much compensation the seller and their listing broker have negotiated. So that was really inappropriate or very difficult to fill out. How would you fill that out? I have no clue how much the seller is getting paid and by whom. So GAR recognized that and took that out. So let me show you the 2025 form that will be available to agents in Georgia beginning January 1st, 2025. Again, the title now reflects the appropriateness of this form, Buyer's Broker Compensation Agreement Exhibit. It says exhibit, so you know it's an exhibit to a contract or to an offer. Now, it goes on to say that if compensation has already been agreed to in a separate written agreement, if it's not being modified, you don't need this form. However, again, you have no idea, buyer's agent has no idea how much, if any, compensation is coming from the seller side to offset the buyer's obligation to pay their broker. So again, I'm not going to go through the form in depth in this video. I just want to go over the changes. So title has been changed, and then these paragraphs. So compensation being offered buyer's broker. This is the same compensation of the undersigned. Buyer's broker for professional brokerage services provided in the above referenced transaction, i.e. for that property and the offer date, set forth below. A, compensation shared by seller's broker with the buyer's broker. And this amount is expressed as a percent of the sale price, a flat fee dollar amount, or another arrangement. This is what we typically refer to as a co-op transaction. The traditional way in Georgia for many, many years that buyer's brokers have been paid, generally speaking, from the seller's broker in a co-op transaction. So if it is just a traditional co-op transaction, you fill in A. If, however, the second paragraph, compensation paid by the seller to the buyer's broker. So this is money. So the first option, A, the seller has paid their listing broker a big pile of money, and that listing broker is going to share part of that money with the buyer's broker. That is what you would fill in A, the amount that is being shared by the seller's broker with the buyer's broker. Option B is the seller has most likely arranged to pay their own broker money for services that they are getting for getting the house marketed and sold. The seller has also agreed to compensate the buyer's broker directly, bypassing their own broker and just paying the buyer's broker directly. If that's the situation, then you would fill out B. So this says compensation paid by seller to buyer's broker. Buyer's broker paid directly from the seller. So you're a buyer's agent. You've shown a property. Buyer wants to write an offer. You're writing an offer. One of the terms of your offer is the buyer is going to ask the seller to offset their financial obligation to their broker for professional services rendered to them on the buy side of the deal. You would use, one of the ways you can do that is you would use this exhibit, and you would fill out B, the amount of money that the buyer is asking the seller to pay their broker directly, expressed as a percent of the sale price, flat fee, or other. Then it has verbiage in here that the brokers are third-party beneficiaries and that the compensation to the brokers cannot be changed, basically can't be changed by an amendment between the buyer and the seller. It would require the broker's signatures as well. So then it has a place down here for the buyer to sign, the seller to sign, as well as both, as well as both agents to sign. This is an exhibit, so just like any exhibit, it does require all signatures. Now, the question before I leave this exhibit, the question is, you are a buyer's agent, you are working with a buyer, you are constructing an offer on the seller's house. One of the terms of the buyer's offer, they're going in with a certain sale price, certain closing date, certain financing contingencies, appraisal contingencies, perhaps asking for a closing cost contribution. One of the other terms that the buyer is going to ask of the seller for their offer in total is to offset their financial obligation to their own broker. So how should the buyer ask that? Should the buyer ask for that compensation from the seller's broker or directly from the seller? The buyer, as the buyer's agent, you should direct the buyer, check with your own broker, but if you do not know in advance any amount that the seller's broker has already or will be paid by the seller to share, I believe as a broker and as an instructor that the buyer should ask for compensation directly from the seller. Why? Well, you don't want to violate license law. There is a license law under unfair trade practices where it talks about that the agent cannot modify another agent's compensation. So just to make sure that you are not potentially violating any license laws, you should, I believe, I would suggest check with your own broker that the buyer should ask for compensation directly from the seller. Now, if the seller and the seller's broker have already made other arrangements, that's fine, and the seller will just make a counter offer and counter offer this form how, if any, compensation is to be paid to the buyer's broker. So, I've got one more way though. What is another way that a buyer could ask a seller to compensate their broker to offset their obligation? Well, we have this exhibit, or buyers agents, there is a special stipulation that the Georgia Association of REALTORS has that you may also use. So let me show you that special stipulation. So I'm going to share my screen again, and let me show you the special stipulation. Now, this special stipulation, and the one I specifically want you to pay attention to, is GAR Special Stipulation 620. Buyer requests seller pay buyer's broker's compensation. This special stipulation was introduced to us by GAR January 1st, 2024, and then the verbiage was modified slightly July 1st so that these paragraphs are consistent across all forms where you are talking about buyer's broker's compensation, and seller broker's compensation too. So we do have this special stipulation 619 where it is specific to a VA insured loan. However, the Veterans Administration did change things middle of the year where a buyer getting veterans benefits can pay commission. So this one is probably not going to be used anymore, but this one 620 is the one you could also use instead of this exhibit. Now, you're not going to use both. As I've taught in all of my classes, you never want to address one concept more than one times in multiple ways. So buyers can either request that the seller compensate their broker using that exhibit or using the special stipulation. So again, the special stipulation is not new. It's just an appropriate time to introduce it to you. Agents, do not write this on your own. Please, please, please use the GAR provided special stipulation, because of this last sentence will keep you from violating Georgia license law. And the special stipulation states buyer requests and seller hereby agrees to pay buyer's broker at closing the following compensation for professional services. Again, expressed as a dollar amount, percent of the sale price, or other. Here's the thing that'll keep you out of trouble with GREC. Nothing herein shall be interpreted as a request to alter, modify, or change the commission to be received by the seller's broker, if any, that the seller may have agreed to pay the seller's broker in any separate written agreement. That last sentence is key to keep you from potentially violating license law. So, and again, if the seller and their own broker have made other arrangements, then the seller will simply initiate a counter offer that would clean that up. So I'd love to hear your comments below. What do you prefer? The exhibit or that special stipulation? Comment below. Stay tuned for more videos and watch the previous videos. Thank you so much for watching. Dana Sparks, broker of Maximum One Greater Atlanta Realtors, satisfying your needs with service, innovation, and education. Bye. If you like that video, check out the one here. If you like the content on this entire channel, please click here to subscribe. I try to take even the most complicated of real estate situations and make them crystal clear. See what I did there? Real estate made crystal clear. Thank you guys so much for watching.